The sun had barely set when the quiet coastal town began to change its color. The warm orange light that had filled the streets turned to a dull gray as heavy clouds gathered above the sea. People hurried to their homes, closing windows and pulling children inside. The air felt different that evening, heavy and restless, as if something unseen was waiting to arrive. Sandra Bullock had come to this town with Keanu Reeves for a charity visit. They were helping rebuild small schools destroyed by earlier storms. Both had spent the week meeting families, helping children paint classrooms, and planting trees with volunteers. Their presence had brought joy to the small town. People admired how humble they were, especially Keanu, who often preferred to work silently without attention. That night, Sandra was visiting a family near the riverside. The rain began softly at first, and she smiled at the sound of it hitting the roof. But soon it turned violent. The wind began to roar. Trees bent in the distance, and lightning lit up the sky. Sandra stepped outside for a moment, holding her phone, trying to call Keanu. There was no signal. From the main road, Keanu had already noticed the sudden rise of the river. He spoke with local workers who looked nervous. They said the old dam nearby might not hold if the rain continued. Keanu's calm voice tried to reassure them, but inside he felt something uneasy. He immediately asked about Sandra's location. When one of the volunteers said she was near the lower bridge area, Keanu's heart sank. Minutes later, the emergency siren echoed across the town. It was a sound that froze every living soul. The old dam had begun to crack. People screamed and ran to higher ground. Keanu grabbed a flashlight and rain jacket, calling out to a rescue officer for help. The officer shouted over the noise, saying that the lower roads were already flooded. But Keanu didn't listen. He ran to the nearest boat shed and started untying a small wooden boat. Sandra, still trapped near the riverside house, could hear the chaos growing outside. The family she was visiting began to cry as water rushed through the back door. Within minutes, the ground floor was covered. The small child, Mila, clung to Sandra's hand. Sandra lifted her into her arms and tried to calm her. She looked for higher space, leading everyone to the upper room. She told them to stay calm and keep the windows closed. Outside, the rain was no longer rain. It was a wall of water falling endlessly from the sky. Trees fell and electric poles sparked in the distance. Keanu rode through the rushing water, his arms shaking with effort, his flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. Every time he stopped to listen, he could hear cries from faraway houses. He helped an old man onto a rooftop before continuing toward the lower bridge. Inside the flooded house, Sandra found an old battery lamp and turned it on. It gave just enough light to see the frightened faces around her. She tried to call Keanu again, but her phone battery was nearly dead. She whispered to herself to stay calm, remembering his words earlier that week when they had helped repair a school roof. He had said, "Fear never fixes anything, Sandra. Calm does." The water began to climb higher. Sandra moved furniture to the corners, trying to create a floating surface just in case. She found an old radio and twisted its knob, hoping to find a signal. The static filled the room, then finally a faint voice appeared. "If anyone can hear this, head to high ground. Repeat, move to high ground. This is the rescue base." The voice faded, but Sandra's eyes widened. She recognized the tone. It was Keanu's. She didn't understand how, but it felt like he was speaking directly to her. She called out, "Keanu, can you hear me?" The static returned, and then his calm voice again. "If you're trapped, tie things together. Stay above the water line. Don't panic." Her heart began to race. She believed it was him guiding her, helping her through the darkness. Keanu, meanwhile, was still far from her location. His boat hit debris several times, but he kept going. Lightning flashed above, revealing the broken bridge ahead. He had to carry the boat on foot for a short distance before placing it back into the floodwater. Every second counted, and every minute felt like an hour. Back in the wooden house, the walls started to creak. Sandra and Mila worked together to tie chairs and doors using ropes they found. The older woman from the house prayed quietly while holding her husband's hand. Sandra tried to hide her fear, smiling at Mila and saying, "We'll get through this. Someone out there is coming." Suddenly, the radio crackled again. The same calm voice said, "Keep your courage. Use what you have around you. Help one another," Sandra whispered to herself. "He's close." "I know he is." But in truth, Keanu was still miles away. He had no radio contact at all. The storm had destroyed all signals. The voice she heard wasn't live. It was coming from a pre-recorded emergency message stored in the charity's equipment, something Keanu had helped record years earlier for flood response training. The water reached the second floor. Sandra placed Mila and the others on the floating platform and tied it to a beam. She looked outside through the broken window. The night was full of rain and fear, but she kept hearing that calm voice in her mind. She kept hearing Keanu saying, "Stay calm, Sandra. You'll make it." As the night deepened, exhaustion began to take over. Her hands were cold, her body shaking, but her will stayed strong. She looked at the radio once more and whispered, "Thank you for being calm, Keanu. Your voice keeps us alive." Far away, Keanu's boat finally reached the outer edge of the flooded area. The water was deeper than he imagined. Rescue workers shouted at him to wait until daylight, but he refused. He tied a rope around his waist and entered the freezing current, holding a flashlight above the surface. The storm continued to rage. The flood roared louder than thunder. Inside the wooden house, Sandra closed her eyes, praying silently that the voice would come again. She didn't know it yet, but her survival would depend not just on courage, but on the memory of kindness left behind by a man whose calmness had already saved lives long before this night. The night grew heavier as the floodwater kept rising, pressing against the fragile wooden walls of the house. Thunder rolled like angry waves above the sky, and the wind screamed through every crack. Inside, Sandra held Mila close, whispering soft words to keep her calm. The old couple sat silently near the floating platform, holding a small candle that flickered in the storm. The radio on the table made a low hum again. Sandra turned the dial slowly, her fingers trembling. She waited, and then she heard it, that same calm, steady voice. "If you can hear me, help the weakest first. Make sure the children are safe. Remember, fear wastes time. Stay calm and think." Mila looked up and asked softly, "Is that him?" Sandra smiled weakly. "Yes, Mila, that's Keanu. He's telling us what to do." She didn't know how, but she believed it. His voice carried a strange comfort, a feeling that everything could still be okay. She tied a small rope around Mila's waist and fastened it to the floating furniture. She checked the knots twice, just as the voice had said, then looked outside the window. The darkness outside seemed endless. Far across town, Keanu struggled through the flood. His flashlight flickered as the cold rain hit his face. Every breath felt heavier. He stopped when he reached a fallen tree blocking the way, then lifted his boat over it, the muscles in his arms burning with pain. Still, he kept moving forward. A rescue officer shouted from behind him, "You can't go further, sir. It's too dangerous." Keanu turned his head, his voice calm but firm. "Someone's still out there. I have to reach them." The officer hesitated, then nodded and handed him a flare. "If you find anyone, fire this up. We'll follow the light." Keanu thanked him and continued alone into the storm. The flood was now chest deep. Every time he moved, the current tried to drag him backward, but he didn't stop. In his mind, he kept hearing Sandra's laughter from earlier that day, the way she had helped children draw pictures of a brighter future. He couldn't leave her behind. Back in the flooded house, the situation grew worse. One wall had started to crack. Sandra used a wooden plank to reinforce it, pushing hard until it held. The old woman began to cry, saying, "We won't make it till morning." Sandra took her hand and said softly, "We will. Listen to his voice. He's helping us." She turned to the radio again, hoping to hear that calm tone once more. The static filled the room, then the voice returned. "If you have ropes, tie them high. Build a platform. Stay above the water line. Help each other. Rescue will come." Sandra nodded and started giving everyone small tasks. Mila gathered dry cloth. The old man used a broom handle to push floating debris away. Even though the water kept rising, their spirits stayed strong because of that voice. Meanwhile, Keanu's boat finally reached what used to be the bridge area. It was now just broken wood floating in black water. He stopped for a moment, shining the light around. In the distance, he saw a faint glow. Maybe a candle. Maybe lightning's reflection. He whispered to himself, "Please let that be you, Sandra." He rowed again, his movements slow but steady. The sound of rushing water filled his ears, and once in a while he thought he heard faint cries. but it was impossible to tell from where. The rain made every sound blend into one endless roar. In the house, Mila began to shiver. Sandra took off her wet jacket and wrapped it around her. "You're going to be okay," she said. "We'll see the morning." Mila looked at her and whispered, "He said we'll be fine, right?" Sandra nodded. "Yes, he never lies." The water reached the last step of the staircase. Sandra pushed the platform closer to the ceiling beam, making sure it stayed stable. Every few minutes, she checked the rope. The small candle was almost gone now. She prayed quietly, not for herself, but for Keanu to find them. Miles away, the rescue base was losing contact with most of the town. One of the operators turned to another and said, "Sir, that old radio system is still transmitting the 2009 emergency tape. Should we turn it off?" The officer shook his head. "No, leave it. Some people might still be hearing it. If it gives them hope, that's reason enough." And so the calm, steady voice continued to echo through the broken houses of the flooded town. Keanu's recorded voice, unaware that the woman he loved was hearing it, believing it was him. The night dragged on. Sandra's body was weak, but her mind stayed focused. She began to notice patterns in the sound of the rain, counting seconds between lightning and thunder to predict when it was near. Her calmness began to influence the others. Even the old man who had stopped speaking whispered, "Your calm saved us tonight." Keanu's body shook from the cold as he reached the neighborhood where Sandra was last seen. The current was faster now. He tied the rope around a streetlight pole and began walking, pulling the boat beside him. In the beam of his flashlight, he saw something float past, a broken sign that read, "Riverside Lane." He was close. He shouted, "Sandra!" His voice disappeared into the storm. He shouted again, louder this time, but only the rain answered. In the distance, Sandra thought she heard something. She turned off the radio for a second. Silence filled the room except for the sound of water. Then came a faint call, her name carried by the wind. "Did you hear that?" she asked the others. "He's here." They all listened again, but the sound faded away. The old woman shook her head. "It's just thunder." Sandra didn't give up. She went to the window and shouted, "Keanu, we're here!" Her voice broke in the storm. She kept shouting until her throat hurt. Then suddenly, lightning flashed across the sky. For one brief second, she saw something move in the water. A man holding a flashlight. Her heart jumped. "He's there!" she screamed. "He's coming!" But the light disappeared again. She didn't know if it was real or just her mind playing tricks on her. She looked back at Mila, who was crying softly. Sandra hugged her and whispered, "We just have to hold on a little longer." Outside, Keanu had seen the faint light of a candle in one window. He began swimming toward it, pushing through floating debris and strong current. He could barely see, but he trusted his instinct. As the night reached its darkest hour, both of them fought in their own ways, she with courage and he with determination. They were two souls connected by trust, kindness, and a shared calm that had once built hope for others. The house creaked again. Part of the roof gave way, sending water rushing down. Sandra climbed onto the platform with the others. She looked around, praying that help would come soon. And then, just as the last candle went out, the radio made one final sound. The calm voice spoke again, softer than before. "If you can still hear me, remember this. Help will come. But until then, be the calm you need." Sandra closed her eyes. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I'll try, Keanu." "I'll be calm." The flood kept rising. Somewhere nearby, a flare shot up into the sky, burning red against the darkness. It was Keanu's signal. Rescue was near, but time was running out. The flare burned bright for a few seconds, its red light glowing across the flooded town before disappearing into the rain. Keanu watched it fade, his breath heavy and shallow. The current was stronger now, but he could see the silhouette of a large house half submerged in the distance. One small window still had a faint glow. He whispered to himself, "Hold on, Sandra. I'm close." He pushed his boat forward, using every bit of strength left in his body. Floating debris slammed against him, and sharp branches scratched his arms. But pain didn't matter. He only thought about the woman he had to reach, the friend who had stood beside him in kindness, through every storm of life. Inside the house, Sandra sat quietly, her arm around Mila. The little girl had fallen asleep from exhaustion, her head resting on Sandra's shoulder. The water had reached the top step of the upper floor. It wouldn't be long before it rose higher. The old man spoke weakly. "We can't stay here much longer." Sandra nodded, her eyes searching the room for anything that could help. She found a piece of wood from a broken door and tried to secure it to the floating platform. Every sound outside made her heart jump. Sometimes it was thunder, sometimes it was crashing debris. But once in a while, she thought she heard a voice. The radio had gone silent now, its battery dying. But in her mind, she still heard that calm voice. Keanu's words repeated over and over. "Stay calm, Sandra. Help will come." As the storm howled, Keanu reached the edge of the house. Part of the roof was gone, and the walls looked ready to collapse. He tied his rope to a tree branch and climbed onto the porch, the water almost to his chest. Lightning flashed again, showing him the cracked window upstairs. "Sandra!" he shouted. "Can you hear me?" For a moment, there was only rain. Then a faint reply came through the wind. "Keanu, is that you?" His heart raced. He looked up and saw her shadow through the window. "I'm here," he yelled. "Don't move. I'll come up." Sandra couldn't believe her ears. After hours of fear and darkness, that voice, real this time, not from the radio, filled her with relief. She turned to the others and said, "He found us. He's outside." Mila woke up and smiled weakly. "I told you he'd come." Keanu searched for a way in. The stairs inside were underwater, so he used a piece of rope and climbed through the broken window. When he finally pulled himself in, Sandra ran to him and hugged him tightly. He whispered, "You're safe now." But the moment of peace didn't last. The house groaned loudly, the wooden floor bending beneath the water. Keanu looked around quickly. "We need to leave right now," he said. "This place won't hold much longer." He helped the old couple onto the floating platform and secured Mila in the middle. Rain poured through the broken roof as they pushed toward the window. Outside, the current was fierce. The platform rocked violently, nearly tipping over. "Hold on tight," Keanu said, steadying it. "Stay together and keep your heads up." They moved slowly into the open water. The rain hit like needles, and every wave pushed them in different directions. Sandra held Mila close while Keanu guided the platform toward a nearby tree where his rope was tied. He used the rope to pull them along inch by inch. Sandra shouted over the noise, "How did you find us?" Keanu answered between breaths, "I saw your light. I followed it. I couldn't leave without you." The water level had reached the rooftops of nearby houses. Cars floated like toys and furniture drifted past them. The whole town seemed swallowed by the storm. Then, without warning, a loud cracking sound filled the air. Keanu turned just in time to see a wooden pole collapse and crash into the water beside them, sending waves splashing over the platform. Mila screamed as she lost her grip, but Sandra caught her hand just in time. Keanu's calm voice guided them again. "Don't panic. Keep your balance. We're almost there." He pushed through the water until they reached the large tree. He tied the platform to one of its branches and told everyone to hold on to it. For a moment, they all rested, breathing heavily. Sandra looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You shouldn't have risked your life for us," he smiled faintly. "You would have done the same." Lightning flashed again, revealing how pale his face had become from exhaustion. Still, he kept his voice steady. As they held onto the tree, Keanu looked around for higher ground. In the distance, he spotted the faint outline of a hill. "That's where we're going next," he said. "If we make it there, we'll be safe," the old woman whispered. "But how?" "The water's too strong. We'll use the current," he said. "It can carry us if we guide it right." He untied the rope and slowly directed the platform, letting the water push them forward. Every few seconds, he gave calm instructions: when to lean, when to hold tight, when to push back. His tone was firm but gentle, giving everyone a strange sense of peace even in the middle of chaos. As they floated down the flooded street, Sandra looked at him, remembering the calm voice from the radio earlier. "Keanu," she said softly, "how were you speaking to us before you came?" He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Your voice," she said. "We heard you through the radio. You told us how to stay calm and build the platform." Keanu shook his head slowly. I didn't have any radio with me. For a moment, they both went silent. Only the sound of rain and water surrounded them. Sandra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Then Keanu's eyes widened slightly. Years ago, he said, when I worked with this charity, we made an emergency guide. I recorded instructions for floods like this. Maybe that's what you heard. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. So it wasn't live? No, he said softly. But I'm glad it helped. She looked down, her heart full of emotion. Your voice saved us even when you weren't there. He gave her a small nod. Maybe kindness never really leaves. It just finds a way back when it's needed. As dawn approached, the rain began to slow. The dark clouds turned lighter, and a faint glow appeared on the horizon. But the flood was still strong, and they had a long way to go. Mila pointed toward the distance. I see lights, she shouted. Keanu turned to look. Far away, the rescue team was scanning the area with flashlights. He waved his arms and shouted, Over here! The rescuers saw them and started moving closer. Relief filled everyone's hearts. But before help could reach them, a massive wave formed from the broken dam's release. It rushed down the street, heading straight toward them. Keanu's voice stayed steady. Hold on tight! Everyone leaned back and stay down. The wave hit them hard, flipping the platform halfway and dragging it into the current. Sandra screamed as she lost sight of Mila. Keanu dove into the water, swimming toward her voice. The storm had one last test left for them, and it would decide who made it to the light. The crash of the wave was louder than thunder. Water swallowed everything in an instant, tossing wood, branches, and broken pieces of the town into the dark current. Keanu fought against it, his eyes open despite the burning salt and mud. His only thought was Mila's small voice crying out somewhere ahead. He pushed through the freezing water, kicking hard, calling her name again and again. Mila, keep shouting so I can find you. A faint sound answered, weak but still there. Keanu! He turned toward it and swam as fast as he could. Lightning lit up the scene for just a second, enough for him to see Mila clinging to a floating wooden door, crying. Sandra was close by, trying to reach her but struggling to stay above the water. Keanu took a deep breath and dived. When he came up again, he was beside the girl. I got you, he said calmly. You're okay now. He lifted her onto his back and pushed the floating door toward Sandra. Grab the edge, he shouted. She reached out, her hands trembling, and finally held on. She was pale, her lips shaking, but she managed a small smile. You found her, she said breathlessly. We're not done yet, he replied. We still need to reach that hill. The current dragged them through what used to be a main road. Cars floated around like ghosts of the storm. Keanu guided the door carefully, keeping everyone balanced. Every time the water pulled too strong, he reminded them softly, breathe slow, don't fight the water, let it carry us. Those words, simple and calm, kept them alive. The more Sandra looked at him, the more she realized how quiet his courage was. There was no panic, no anger, no fear. Only focus and care. The sky began to change color. Dawn had arrived, but it brought no peace. Thick mist covered everything, making it impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. The sound of rushing water echoed through the valley. Sandra looked up and whispered, We just have to keep believing. Keanu nodded, though his arms ached and his body felt heavy. He was exhausted but refused to stop. Finally, through the mist, a faint shape appeared, a small patch of land rising above the water line. It wasn't much, but it was solid ground. There! Keanu shouted. Hold tight, we're almost there. The last stretch was the hardest. The current grew faster as it narrowed between two fallen buildings. Keanu used his legs to steer the door, but a large piece of debris hit him from behind. He groaned, losing his grip for a second. Sandra reached out and caught his arm before he drifted away. Don't you dare let go, she said firmly. He gave a weak smile. I wasn't planning to. Together, they pushed through the narrow path until finally the water slowed. Keanu dragged the door toward the small hill. When they reached it, he helped Mila climb up first, then the old couple, and finally Sandra. The moment they all stood on solid ground, everyone fell to their knees. The rain was softer now, more like a whisper than a roar. The nightmare seemed to fade with each passing second. Mila hugged Sandra tightly. We made it, she whispered. Keanu sat quietly beside them, breathing hard. His face was pale and small cuts covered his hands. Sandra noticed he was shivering. She took her shawl and wrapped it around him. "You saved us," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, your courage did that. You stayed calm when it mattered most." Sandra smiled faintly. "Maybe because your voice kept reminding me to." He looked at her curiously. "My voice?" She nodded. "The one from the radio. I kept hearing it all night. It told us what to do. It told me not to give up." He looked away for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "I remember recording that tape years ago. I never imagined it would matter one day." "It mattered more than you think," she said, tears filling her eyes. "It was the only thing keeping us together when we thought we'd die." For a while, none of them spoke. They just sat in silence, watching the morning light spread across the flooded town. Rescue helicopters began to appear in the distance. The sound of their blades echoed like a promise of safety. But as one helicopter drew closer, Sandra noticed Keanu wasn't standing. He was still sitting near the water, his breathing shallow. She hurried to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Keanu, are you okay?" He smiled weakly. "Just tired. My legs feel numb." She looked at his arm and saw a deep cut bleeding through his sleeve. "It must have happened when the debris hit him. You're hurt," she said urgently. "It's fine," he whispered. "Help the others first." Sandra shook her head firmly. "Not without you." She tore a piece of her shirt and wrapped it tightly around his wound. "You're not leaving me here, do you understand?" He smiled again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You sound exactly like me." The helicopter lowered above them, sending waves of wind across the muddy ground. Rescuers shouted instructions, dropping a rope ladder. Keanu helped lift Mila first, then the old couple. When it was Sandra's turn, she hesitated, looking at him. "You first," she said. "No, you go," he replied. "Keanu, please," she insisted, tears in her eyes. "You've done enough." He gave her that same calm look he always did, the one that could make even fear go quiet. "Then let's go together." They both grabbed the ladder at the same time. The rescuer above pulled them up slowly, the wind whipping around their faces. Sandra held on tightly, never letting go of his arm. As they rose above the flood, she looked down at the destroyed town. Roofs, cars, trees, all half buried underwater. But in the middle of that ruin stood the small wooden house where it all began, still barely holding on. She whispered, "We made it out, but so many didn't." Keanu's voice was quiet. "That's why we have to help rebuild." When they finally reached the helicopter, the crew wrapped them in blankets. Mila sat beside them, still holding Sandra's hand. She looked at Keanu with innocent eyes and said, "Your voice made me brave." Keanu smiled gently. "Then promise me you'll always keep that calm inside you." She nodded seriously. "I will." The helicopter lifted higher, carrying them toward the rescue camp on the hill. The town below faded under the clouds, but the lesson of that night stayed with them. Kindness, calmness, and courage could turn fear into survival. As Sandra looked at Keanu, she realized something deeper. His calm wasn't just strength. It was love in its purest form, quiet, steady, and selfless. She whispered, "You didn't just save my life. You saved my hope." He turned his head slightly, eyes half closed from exhaustion. "Hope doesn't need saving. It just needs reminding." The morning sun broke through the clouds, touching their faces with light. The storm was over. But the story of that night was only beginning. Soon, the truth behind the voice that saved them would come to light, and it would change everything she thought she knew. The rescue camp was crowded but peaceful. The rain had stopped, leaving only soft mist over the valley. Survivors sat wrapped in blankets, some crying quietly, others whispering prayers of thanks. Helicopters kept arriving, bringing in more people from nearby towns. Sandra sat beside Keanu under a large tent. His arm was bandaged now, and color was slowly returning to his face. Mila slept between them, holding Sandra's hand tightly. For the first time in hours, there was no fear, only silence. Sandra looked at Keanu and said softly, "I still can't believe that voice came from years ago." He smiled faintly. Maybe kindness doesn't know time. It just waits for the right moment to be heard again. His words lingered in her heart. She thought about the long night, the fear, the calm voice guiding her through it all. It felt almost unreal. Later, a rescue officer approached them. "Miss Bullock, Mr. Reeves, the radio system you heard, it was activated by a power surge during the flood. We checked the files. The recording you followed was made by you, Keanu, more than 10 years ago." Sandra looked at him in awe. "So it really was his voice?" The officer nodded. "Yes. And it played automatically when the emergency frequency detected movement near the old houses. It saved many people, not just you." Keanu lowered his eyes, humbled. "I never thought a simple act like recording a message could matter so much." Sandra touched his shoulder gently. "It mattered more than you'll ever know." Hours later, as the sun finally broke through the clouds, Sandra stood outside watching the light spread across the wet ground. Keanu joined her, his calm presence beside her like always. She turned to him and said quietly, "You were the calm we all needed, Keanu. Your kindness saved us, even when you didn't know it." He looked at her with a tired smile. "We saved each other. That's what kindness does. It circles back." In that moment, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the camp. Mila was awake, running around with a small group of kids, her face bright with joy. Sandra and Keanu watched her, knowing the storm had taken much. But it had also given something precious, a reminder that calmness, compassion, and courage could rebuild what fear had tried to destroy. Weeks passed after the flood, and the town began to heal. Roads were cleared, homes were rebuilt, and people slowly returned to their lives. The charity that Sandra and Keanu had come to support began working again, this time stronger and more united than before. One bright morning, Sandra stood beside a new building under construction near the riverbank. A sign read "The Calm Within Shelter." She had chosen the name herself, inspired by the voice that had saved them. Mila, now smiling and full of energy again, helped paint the sign with a group of volunteers. She turned to Sandra and said proudly, "We'll help everyone who's scared, just like you and Keanu helped me." Sandra smiled softly. "Yes, Mila. That's what this place is for, to remind people that calmness can save lives." Keanu walked up behind them, carrying boxes of supplies. His arm had healed, but he still wore a small bandage as a quiet memory of that night. He looked at the new shelter and said, "It's beautiful." "It feels like peace itself," Sandra nodded. "It's more than a shelter. It's a promise." Inside, the walls were painted with messages written by survivors, words of gratitude, strength, and hope. One wall displayed a simple quote that had become the heart of their story: "Be the calm you need." Later that afternoon, a local news reporter visited to cover the reopening. As the camera rolled, the reporter asked Sandra, "What made you build this place?" Sandra looked at Keanu, her eyes shining. "Because calm saved me when fear could have taken everything," she said. "When I was trapped, I heard a voice that told me to help others, to stay steady, to trust kindness. I thought it was coming from the man standing beside me, but it turned out to be his voice from the past. And that's when I realized something. Real kindness never disappears. It finds you again when you need it most." The reporter turned to Keanu. "Did you ever imagine your voice would save so many lives?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "No. I just recorded something I hoped might help one day. But that's the thing about kindness. You never know how far it will travel. Maybe the calmest thing you do today will save someone years later." As the day ended, the townspeople gathered outside the shelter. Candles were lit, one for each life saved during the flood. The evening light reflected on the water, calm and golden now, as if the river itself had found peace. Sandra and Keanu stood side by side, watching the glow of the candles spread across the shore. Mila held both their hands, smiling. Sandra whispered, "We survived because of your calm, because of the words you left behind." Keanu looked at her and replied quietly, "No. We survived because you believed. Calmness only works when someone chooses to trust it." A soft wind passed over them, gentle and warm. It carried the faint echo of a familiar voice, the same calm tone that once guided them through darkness. now a part of every life it touched. In the distance, children's laughter mixed with the sound of calm water flowing again. The storm was gone, but its memory had turned into something beautiful, something that would keep teaching others for years to come. And as night fell, the candles near the river kept burning, their light steady and peaceful, like reminders that no matter how fierce the storm, kindness and calm will always find a way to rise again.